Now I very much welcome our keynote speaker, Ben Bucks. Ben Bucks is a now independent international expert. Already in 1986, he initiated the first local LGBTI equality action plan in the city of The Hague. He's the co-founder of the Eurogames and the initiator of the European Governmental LGBTI Focal Points Network at the Council of Europe, where he led the secretariat of the network during many years. He will speak about the 2010 recommendation and the way forward in Europe. Dear Ben, the floor is yours. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, for giving me the floor. Dear fellow Europeans, I'd like to thank the German presidency for putting equal rights for LGBTI persons on the agenda. 2 events during one and the same Council of Europe presidency, that is really unprecedented. And I also like to commend the German federal government for issuing an LGBTI inclusion strategy, focusing on foreign policy and development cooperation last March. This makes you, Minister Giffey, leading by example. And I also like to commend the Secretary General, Madame Burić, for her strong commitment and contribution to both events. Your visibility and commitment is, compared to your predecessors, unprecedented. And on the sideline, I'd like to commend you both for your strong and clear statements on the Istanbul Convention, on combating violence against women, and the recent backsliding by some European countries in particular. That backsliding on gender equality and equality on the grounds of sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, and sex characteristics makes me asking, how much intolerance can Europe tolerate? In my keynote, I will touch upon 3 topics. First, what's the practical use of Recommendation 2010-05? Second, where do we stand in Europe? And third, how can we move forward with national action plans? But I'll start with an anecdote. When I started as government policy advisor on LGBTI equality for the Dutch government in 2003, the Christian Democratic State Secretary for Public Health and Social Welfare asked me to draw a national action plan. And that made me wondering if there were any examples from abroad that I could learn from. Of course, I knew about the previous action plans from my own country, but from abroad, I only knew few examples. The plan from the German state of Berlin, from North Rhine-Westphalia, and those plans from Flanders in Belgium and Catalonia in Spain. It was like searching for the needle in the haystack. And that lack of good policy examples from elsewhere in Europe triggered the founding of the European Focal Point Network. Now back to today. Let's move to the first question. What's the practical use of the recommendation? The recommendation covers 12 thematic topics with a total of 46 tangible sections. And since its adoption, it has been revised and reviewed 2 times. And this review mechanism is the strongest intergovernmental mechanism on LGBTI rights globally, and makes it a robust benchmark. But what most people are not aware of is that LGBTI equality rights are one of the only human rights areas where no global standards exist. There's no United Nations Convention, like for the rights of disabled people, or to combat violence against women. Let's move to how practical this recommendation has proven to be over the 11 years. And from experience, I have noted 5 payoffs. 1, being a human rights standard provides a baseline for shaping national policy measures. 2, its wide scope provides leverage to policy advisors when they seek doing business with their fellows from other responsible government ministries, including the Gender Equality Department. And the third payoff is that its ministerial approval gives leverage to civil society organizations when they encounter government authorities. Number 4, its recognition of different stakeholders creates a hook for hosting roundtables and for inviting stakeholders to take their share. And finally, its stock of thematic topics kicked off the technical support to member states and the thematic seminars by the Council of Europe SOGI unit. And these 5 practical payoffs brings me to the question, where do we stand now? Let's take the helicopter and make a picture of Europe from a distance. I see 3 encouraging developments on the protection of human rights for LGBTI people in Europe. A further institutionalization, an improved data infrastructure, and a growing sense of urgency. Let's have a closer look to those 3 developments. In regard to the institutionalization at European level, we enjoy, since last year, a steering committee on anti-discrimination, diversity and inclusion with a mandate on SOGI matters at the Council of Europe. And although the recommendation only refers to LGBT people, it does not mention intersex people. But we have witnessed the Council of Europe Bioethics Committee taking physical integrity of intersex people on board. We see ECRI exercising her LGBTI inclusive mandate. And we took note of the recent adoption of the Roma Action Plan, clearly indicating that the recommendation also applies to intersex persons. A third institutionalization development is that the European Focal Point Network and its Secretariat are now embedded within the Council of Europe. And we have an LGBTI equality subgroup being put in place by the European Commission. And we have a very robust LGBTI equality strategy with 4 pillars that has been presented by the European Commission recently. And the European Commission is actively taking part in the work of the Council of Europe Governmental Focal Points Network. And along these 6 examples of institutionalization in Europe, I also witness a significant improvement of data collection. It's a real accomplishment that we now, today, have 3 complementing sets of data available. 1, the lived experience of LGBTI community in the European Union and the Balkan countries. And the second set of data is about the legal situation for LGBTI people in OECD countries and in the EU. And the third set is data on the social acceptance of LGBTI people by the general public in Europe. And those validated sets of data can help us holding ourselves, but also other member states, accountable. Apart from a further institutionalization and improvement of data collection, I also see a growing sense of urgency in our region. We witness a growing appetite amongst Council of Europe presidencies, like the German presidency, for putting the discrimination of LGBTI people prominently on the presidency's agenda. We see a rising number of government donors supporting the work of various European LGBTI network organizations like OII Europe, like ILGA Europe. And we see a willingness amongst member states to support the work of the SOGI units financially. We see government ministers meet with civil society organizations on an annual basis since the first IDOT forum in 2013. And this year's edition will be hosted by the UK government and next year by the government of Cyprus. And last but not least, we see a closer alignment and strategic cooperation between the Council of Europe and the European Commission. And we see an even better intergovernmental cooperation within the European Focal Point Network. Since the adoption of the recommendation, we have won a number of battles against discrimination. But the battle for a tolerant Europe is not over. I trust the first panel to go deeper into the current situation in Europe and the rollback in parts of our region. My dear fellow Europeans, let us move to the last question. How can national action plans be drivers for change, for progress? It was 8 years ago, on the occasion of the first European Idaho Forum in The Hague, that ILGA Europe issued a press release, and I quote, "Member states should recognize the need to have LGBTI equality action plans that go beyond legislation. National action plans complement legislation, and those plans are drivers for a greater equality in Europe," unquote. Today, 8 years later, I'm happy to see that 1/3 of the OECD member states and half of the European Union member states do have a national action plan. And the Council of Europe and the European Commission both have made the development of national action plans a priority. Now let's have a closer look to a variety of the action plans. And from experience, I know that action plans have different shapes and content. And of course, it goes without saying that socio-economically, legally, and politically, countries can be different from each other. And we also should bear in mind that LGBTI equality policies are also dealt with at different levels. Some countries have a federal system, others have devolved the competence to lower levels or regions. And some member states even have policy plans at 2 or 3 different policy levels. Some countries have just an external action plan like Germany, and others have an external and a national plan. And unfortunately, some countries have none of both. But this all does not take away that we cherish the recommendation as a human rights benchmark. So now we know about the what, but not necessarily about the how. Therefore, let's get practical. In regard to the drafting of national plans, I have some food for thought for you. First of all, what instruments do I have to make an action plan work? Is there a budget that allows my minister or state secretary for granting projects, running pilots, commissioning surveys, or doing research? Are there any quick wins? Has there been a proper brainstorm with civil society organizations and other stakeholders? Are local governments included? What's their stake? And how can my minister or state secretary make a joint effort with Rainbow Cities? How can my government track progress in society? Is there an existing indicator that can be put in place as overarching policy target? For example, how is my country doing in the recent Eurobarometer? Or according to the recent OECD survey? How did my country perform according to the Fundamental Rights Agency surveys? And what should be the threshold, the policy target in 3 or 4 years' time? How ambitious is my government minister? And have I checked the country-specific recommendations from ECRI, from CEDAW, UPR, and the OECD? Which specific recommendations can my minister take on board? And how can I use the good work done by so many volunteers from civil society and capitalize that good work into the policy plan? And finally, is there a coherent internal and external approach? Does government have a national plan and an external policy? And I trust the second panel to go deeper into the way forward. Madam Chair, dear fellow Europeans, I conclude. At the beginning of my keynote, I said that the recommendation is the strongest intergovernmental review mechanism globally. The next and third review report is expected by 2025. And I have good reasons to trust the future Council of Europe presidencies of Luxembourg and Malta for guiding that review process to a good end. I'd like to thank all progressive member states for their support to the good work of the SOGI unit, for their commitment to the CD-ADI and the European Focal Point Network, and for the financial support to European and national LGBTI civil society network organizations. Madam Chair, I felt very privileged to share my thoughts and considerations with you all. Thank you very much for giving me the floor, and I wish you a fruitful meeting. Thanks.
Thank you, Ben, for this compelling speech. It taught us so much also about how to go about, to see what does my government do, what indicators can I use. So thank you very much for this insightful talk and the keynote, and I'm sure we come back to this later in the different panels. Thank you, Ben. And it made also clear how much we still have to do in regards to LGBTI rights in Europe. And for you, dear audience, the information that additional materials, such as these presentations or the keynote, will be made available, and will be made available on the event site and uploaded. So no worries that you will miss something. And moving on in our schedule, we now have a break that will be until 2:30 before our first panel. Remember, this could be a time that you could use, of course, for enjoying, for taking a break, but also for sending us some questions. So if you look below of the screen, there is a link where you can click on, and you can send us in the question tool your questions already for the panel, or also during the panel then when it comes up. So enjoy your break, and we will be back at 2:30 sharp. Thank you.